Due to Ontario's guidelines, we are presenting these live streaming events in a virtual environment to keep everyone safer. We hope you will join us in the next several weeks. Please stay safe and stay well. Hi everyone, and welcome to our live streaming event for the Webequie Supply Road Project. I'm Don Parkinson, Consultation Lead with S&C Lavalin. Typically, we would be visiting communities in person to meet with them, to talk to them about the project, but in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, we're adapting to this new normal, or whatever we want to call it, and offer different ways of engaging with communities, and this is one of them. Each week at 11 a.m. on Wednesdays over the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about various topics about the environmental assessment. We encourage you to engage with us throughout the session and to send in your questions. The contact information by text and email will be on your screen. And today we have, the second week in a row, a special guest. We have John Cooper. As I put on my 1980s headset here, I'm moving ahead as we were talking about before. John, welcome back again for another week of discussion about this time water. We're going to talk about water directly.
Hey Don, it's good to be here again.
John, as you know, water's a big topic in this community, in Webequie, and in many of the neighboring communities. It's a broad topic too. There's a lot to talk about. We could do 10 sessions on this, John, and I think we're going to start talk about two components: surface water and groundwater, or what many community members call spring water. We're going to talk a bit about that. We know community members are concerned about this. We want to talk about this. We want to talk about the work that we're doing as part of the environmental assessment to look at water, to study water thoroughly. And you're going to see a couple of videos during the course of the presentation. Then at the end, we're going to do a preview of next week's show. And I'd like everyone to sort of keep their eyes on the website. There's a lot of information on Facebook and Instagram. There's a lot of information that is available. I think you're going to see some more community-based information where community members will be talking about the significance of topics like water to community members, which I think should be really interesting. So thanks again for joining us, John. There's a couple of terms that are used a lot when talking about water, and what we're trying to do through these sessions is break down this technical language and start making it a little bit more understandable for people to follow, so they can understand what we're doing as part of the environmental assessment. So let's tackle a couple of them here, John. You can put on your teacher's hat here and tell us a bit about hydrogeology and hydrology. See, I can barely say them myself, John.
Yeah, good question, Don. So the first one, hydrology, is basically the study of water on the surface. So it starts with rainfall or snowfall. So how much of that you have, and then how much of that turns into stream flow. So hydrology is basically that study. So how much rainfall and snowfall is generated in an area, and then how much of that turns into surface water. So how much actually gets into streams and creeks and lakes. Hydrology is basically water in the ground. So where it accumulates, how it moves, that sort of stuff is sort of hydrogeology. So once the water is in the ground and moving in the ground, it turns into the realm of hydrogeology.
Okay, that helps a lot, John. Let's talk about the surface water first, or hydrology. Now that I've been educated, I can start swinging around that term a bit. How would you describe how water is distributed across Webequie's homeland? There's a lot of water in the Webequie area, isn't there?
Yeah. So I mean, mean annual precipitation is how much rainfall and snowfall in the area is about 800 millimeters a year. It's distributed over sort of a really flat area. So I mean, the area of Webequie is pretty flat. It's the James Bay lowland. So once the rainfall falls, hits the ground, a lot of it just sort of sits there. It moves very slowly until it actually hits one of the larger rivers. But the whole area is a lot of muskeg, a lot of swamp, bog. So the water is pretty slow moving for the most part. It's a very flat area.
John, is 800 just, this is just me throwing out a question off the top of my head here. Is 800 millimeters a lot of rain for over a year, really?
I mean, it's not really. I mean, it depends. I mean, compared to a desert, sure.
Yeah,
Compared to a monsoon in, Southeast Asia, no.
yeah,
So it's all relatively speaking, right?
yeah.
A lot of that rainfall does occur in the winter as snowfall, right? So when you get your freshet or your spring melt, that's where a lot of your water is surface water is produced at that time, right? So it's not spread evenly across the year.
Okay, when it comes to hydrology or the surface water side of things, this is a big question, but you can break it down if you want. What will you be looking at as part of the environmental assessment?
So that was for surface water?
Yeah,
So yeah, the big thing we really want to look at for surface water is sort of how much water you have,
yeah.
where, what the seasonality of that, so when it's, produced or when it's created, where it goes, and all of those things sort of play into particularly a road design. You want to know how much water you deal with at the beginning of the project so you can design your crossings and your road appropriately. And then from an environmental standpoint, you want to know all those things so you kind of know how the environment interacts with the water now. So when you do design something or put infrastructure such as a road in place, you can do it understanding what the effects will be on the environment. So water obviously plays an important factor, right? You don't want to build a road and then block up a river or change the habitat of the wildlife in the area, whether it be caribou or moose or fish in the creek itself. So all those sort of things play into what we're looking at for this project.
So we'll also be looking at the quality of the water too, right? Like the chemical makeup of it or composition of it, right, John?
Yep, that's correct, and that's same with the volume you have. You want to know sort of what you're dealing with ahead of time, so that way your design doesn't change that in a negative way.
So why is all this work on important to the EA, the environmental assessment? Does it
Well,
feed into forming like a baseline and a detailed understanding of the area where the project's going to be? Is that the main focus?
yeah, exactly. So part of the environmental assessment is sort of your baseline. So understanding what conditions are prior to building anything, right? So the first step in designing anything is understanding what you're dealing with, right? So think of it as like if you build a house, the first thing you need to know is, well, where it's going, what trees might need to be removed, what your foundation looks like. So it's no different than this type of project, right? You want to know how much water is in the area, where it's going now, how it interacts with the natural environment. It's sort of uh, its uses as well, like animal uses, fish habitat, and that way you can understand what the effect or impact of your design might be, and design your infrastructure, you know, to mitigate as much impact as possible. So you
Yeah.
want to sort of blend your design in with the natural surroundings. And you can't do that unless you know what your existing surroundings look like.
And you don't know how to mitigate or control impacts unless you understand something, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So a lot of this process is just understanding what is there now and how things behave, without building anything.
Yeah.
So your design can, blend with the existing environment and conditions.
That's good. I think we're going to shift to talk a bit about watersheds now. So I'm going
Okay.
to get our team to bring up a map in a minute on watersheds, and you can you can tell us a bit about watersheds, John. You can educate us on watersheds. So I've got some good questions for you. This is the watersheds in this area are big, aren't they? They're very big.
I get it. It's all perspective, right? So
Yeah.
the project crosses three major drainage or watershed areas. So the Wisk, the Appawatuxet, and the Ekwan. Those are sort of the three major rivers or tributaries that are impacted or will be crossed by this infrastructure. But if you break it down, I mean, a basic watershed is a catchment area, right? So if water falls within a certain area, where it ultimately reports sort of is that drainage area, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at a bridge or a watercourse crossing, say a culvert of the road, the catchment is any drop of water that reports to that or will flow to that point.
Yes.
So in the case of this road, there's 26 road crossings.
Yeah.
So some have much larger areas that report to it than others. Some are as small as, say, 1 kilometer, square kilometers. So not a very big area. And others are up to, say, 1,000 kilometers, square kilometers, so much larger. So a watershed is really just, if you think of a drop of water falling somewhere, where it ultimately reports, it would be basically the watershed. So it's a drainage area. It's what area is captured by a certain point.
So within a watershed, you have things called subwatersheds, right? Which are, for example, stream that empties into a river has a watershed associated with it, which is called a subwatershed, right? That's another term that I think our viewers are gonna see a lot.
Yeah, so I mean, a watershed can be any size, right? It really depends on what area you're looking at. In the case of a subwatershed, it's really, as you say, a smaller area within that larger area. So
Yes.
say if you take the Winnisk watershed, it's huge. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's probably, 100,000 square kilometers. It's very large. And within that, you can break that into many sub-watersheds depending on, the individual little creek you're looking at that feeds into that watercourse.
So, John, here's a question for you to help understand watersheds a little bit better. Do different watersheds behave differently when it comes to the movement of water through them when there's rainfall or snow melt? Like, what makes watersheds different from each other? What are the factors to consider?
Good question. Now, there's so many different factors, right? So first is topography. So I mean, if you're looking at
What's
a
topography,
flat,
John? Help me out with this.
sorry, basically like how the change in height along the landscape.
Okay.
So if you have a
Yep.
really flat area, the water will be more slow moving and sort of more, sort of sit there.
It's like the
Whereas
shape
if
of the
you're,
land, right?
yeah,
Is that
exactly.
fair? Okay.
Yep. And then say you have like a mountain, the water's going to come a lot faster.
Yep.
So, topography or the change in elevation or height of your or shape of your landscape, right?
Yep.
Also things like vegetation. Obviously, if there's a lot of trees, a lot of sort of or muskeg bog area, it's going to behave differently than if it was, like a grassy field or a paved area or something along those lines, right? If you have a lot of lakes, that holds water a lot better than, a forested area. So that plays into it. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors that play into, um, how your watershed behaves and how it holds water and how it, lets water pass through or releases water downstream.
John, in where I live in the city, the watershed that I live in, it's known as being. It was always known as being one that can change really fast. So with a major rain event, it the flows are very high, and so of course, as a result of that, there was a lot of flooding in the area. This was many years ago, and
Hmm.
so what they had to do is build what really are man-made lakes and ponds. What we have already naturally in Webequie. They built these in the city to act as like temporary storage of water so that it wouldn't flood other areas.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a common problem with sort of urbanization in large cities. It's the more you pave, the more roads you put, the more houses and stuff where that prevents the environment to naturally hold water, it just generates faster flows and higher flows, right?
And soil's a big part of it too, I guess, eh, John?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of water is retained within soils. A lot of water is held within lakes or sort of swampy, boggy, muskeg type material. Forests hold water. I mean, just the physical trees slow the water down or sort of catch a lot of the water in their leaves, and then it evaporates back out. So yeah, there's a lot of things that play into the overall hydrology of whatever area you're looking at for a project.
So different, and so going. Sorry, I'm talking about soils again, but different soils like clay holds water better than sand, right? Things like that.
It'll hold water, but it also doesn't infiltrate as much, so it's more
What does
packed together.
infiltrate
So
mean,
it
John? Help me out
sort
with that.
of infiltrate is kind of like how it goes into the ground. So if you think of like if you're at a beach and you pour a bucket of water in the sand, it disappears, right?
Yep.
It sort of infiltrates or goes into the ground and keeps moving. Whereas if you pour that same bucket on, a clay sort of soil, it takes a really long time to get into the soil. So
Yeah.
yeah, definitely the type of material plays into, how much water you ultimately have on the surface.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. I learned a lot from that, John. The watersheds and hydrology and hydrogeology. I'm going to be an expert after this is over, or at least I'm going to pretend to be an expert after this is over. Right now, we're going to take a quick break and go to a drone video. Some of the fine work our team has done doing some drone work over the Webequie study area. So let's cut to that for a minute or so, and then we'll come back and continue our conversation with John. Get ready, John. There's some tough ones coming. I'm not going to go easy on you anymore.
One of the purposes of the EA, or the environmental assessment, is to look at natural spots like this, filled with beauty and used by the community, and to come up with concrete solutions as to how we can protect it. The community weighs in, scientists weigh in, and other communities can give their comments, and from all this information, a plan is made that will guide the construction of any roads, bridges, etc. to cause the least damage.
And we're back. Okay, John, I hope everyone enjoyed that video. Um, got some more questions here for you. This one, um, do you treat the entire project area the same way when it comes to surface water, or do you have to treat some areas different from others?
Good question, Don. So as part of this project, we're doing sort of twofold. So we do a bit of a regional analysis to kind of figure out generally how water behaves within the area. But then when you look at the design for the infrastructure itself, say each crossing, you then look at it sort of, as we discussed earlier, each little catchment might behave differently from, the next one. So we kind of look at sort of the smaller watersheds as it relates or as it flows to a specific crossing.
What kinds of things specifically do you do in your work on surface water to make sure the road won't impact the environment, John?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing we've touched on is understanding the baseline condition. So figuring out and understanding how water behaves now, so where it goes, how much of it you go, and sort of when you see that flow, what time of year. And then in your design, say for a crossing, you kind of factor all those in. So you want your crossing large enough to pass flow as it kind of normally would without flooding any upstream areas, as well as you want to look at things like fish crossings or habitat for other animal type needs, right? You want to factor all those things into your design to make sure you don't affect the environment as much as possible.
Okay, that brings me to my next question. At the water crossings, John, where the road goes over a river or a stream, how do you predict how much water will be going under a bridge or through a culvert pipe during different situations, like heavy rain, moderate rain, light rain? Like, how do you do that? What tools do you use in doing that?
Yeah, good thought. So step one is sort of you try to figure out what your design criteria is, right? So with anything in when you're building something, you need to know what your bounds are. You want to put something in a box that you can actually solve, right?
So
So
the things that you need to think about when you're doing the design, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So when it comes to the specific water aspect, you need to figure out when are you most likely to have a large flow. So you kind of figure out what your largest flow that you want to design to, and that's, solves one problem. So then you know how much flow you're dealing with. It doesn't really matter what time of year that flow happens because your culvert or your crossing is already sized for that. So if it comes in the spring, you're large enough. If it comes in the fall, you have it covered as well. So step one is figuring out how much flow you have. And there's a number of ways you could do that. In this approach, for the project, we've taken the approach of looking at a lot of the surrounding catchments that are sort of gauged. What gauged is kind of um, they're monitored. So Environment Canada and Water Survey of Canada have some rivers that have staging and gauging stations on. So basically, they go out and they monitor the flow. So they know, how much flow you have for say the past 20, 30, 40 years. So we can take that data and sort of apply it to the catchments of Webequie because they're similar, right? They're flat. They have the same type of topography or
So they
land
behave
shape.
the same way, really, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? So we can take this data that Environment Canada has or Water Survey of Canada has for 20, 30, 40 years and get an idea of what the individual crossings of Webequie will behave. So we can kind of get the flows that way. And then once you have the flow and we've gone out and our fish study group has taken surveys and we know what type of fish there are. We know generally the shape of the water courses, the rivers and the creeks. So we can then apply what your flow is to the shape of the water, the crossings, and then through computer modeling or just empirical calculations, figure out what your crossing needs to look like, to mitigate the flooding.
So by empirical, you mean directly measuring, right? Right, John?
Yeah, empirical is kind of just a fancy way of saying like formulas, like math calculations,
Okay.
essentially.
Yeah.
Just
No, it's good. That's interesting. So there's a lot to this. It's you're not eyeballing this. You're using software to look at different situations, right? And then use that to be able to come up with sort of an idea of the behavior, right? That's
yeah,
really what it boils down to. Okay, so I understand as part of this project, there's 26 water crossings along the proposed road corridor. How do you decide what kind of structure, whether it's a bridge or a culvert, goes at each crossing? What factors do you think about when you're going through that process, John?
so I think the biggest one is really just what the landscape looks like now. So you take the Equan or the Appawatuskata or a larger river, right? If you're actually crossing it, you're not going to try to fit that in a tiny culvert. You're going to that's obviously a bridge, right? Where there's obviously a very defined water course. So through eons of water traveling through the landscape, it's created its own defined channel.
Yeah,
If it's wide enough, that's like you're going to put that as a bridge.
Yep.
And then you can take a step back and look at the flows, right? If it, as we talked about earlier, if your design flow is large, combined with a really wide, river or creek, that is a good candidate for a bridge. In areas where it might be really wide, but it's a really low flow, you might be able to put that into a couple smaller culverts rather than one large bridge. So it's kind of, you look at the existing landscape and then combine that with what flow you've calculated that needs to pass through that crossing, and then from there you can kind of start getting an idea of the type of structure you need.
So John, for the culvert pipes that carry water underneath a road where it crosses a river or stream, how do you know what size of pipe to use? Does this go back to your computer modeling that you were talking about?
Yep, yeah, exactly. So we use some computer modeling. Again, I mean, for a preliminary look, you can do just some math calculations. But for the most part, you put it into a software program, and it kind of works with you to come up with a good solution. And I mean, in conjunction with you work with a biology team as well. I mean, you have to figure out, not just the engineering, the hydraulics or how water will flow. You want to look at, what environmental effects that might have as well, right?
Yes. Yeah, to preserve the habitat and
Exactly. Yep.
yeah, because I mean, when you're building bridges across water courses, it's a major construction job. So the challenge is to limit any kind of temporary damage as much as possible, right, John?
Yep. Well, temporary damage as well as permanent, right? I mean,
Yep.
for instance, in some cases where we know there's fish habitat,
Yeah.
we're going with an open bottom culvert. So
Yes.
essentially, you think of a circular culvert as just a barrel, right? Everyone's seen those.
Yeah.
But what this is, it's a half circle, and it has a special footing, and it kind of goes over the water course, and the actual stream itself is not affected per se.
Yes, that's great.
So fish can keep going back and forth. You're not changing the bed or the sort of the material within the river. You're just sort of putting a semicircle over top of it and then putting the road on top. So as far as the fish are concerned, there isn't really a change to their natural flow, their natural habitat.
And there's lots of examples out there now, John. You probably agree with me, where after having put in structures, big structures like this, they've actually improved the habitat because they know so much more now about how to compensate for lost habitat, and so they can actually enhance or improve fish habitat at a water crossing. So there's lots of opportunities there for actually improving the quality of fish habitat at these crossings, believe it or not. So now that's really interesting stuff, John. I think now we're going to go to another drone video, little interlude before our final set of questions. When we come back from the video, we're going to go underground and talk about groundwater, John. So get your hard hat on for that. And I think we've almost got the video queued up. Yeah, we're good to go. Okay, we'll come back to you in a minute, John. Thanks.
All over the area, and sometimes specific sites for different seasons.
So, do community members do a lot of ice fishing?
That's one of the favorite things that the community members do. At least a dozen people every day. Do
I hope everyone's relaxed now, if not asleep after that really soothing drone video. The music is just, yeah, that's... John, you still there? You awake there, John?
Oh, I'm wide awake, Don.
Okay, good. That's good, because there's more work to be done here. We're going to talk about groundwater now, John. Community members often call groundwater spring water. Can you tell us, sort of, give us a bit of an overview as to what kind of work will be done on groundwater for the environmental assessment?
Yeah, so as part of it, some similar with surface water, there'll be a bit of a, I believe, a regional approach, and sort of looking at the individual sort of sections along the roadway. So within that, some field work, so putting in some groundwater wells to sort of figure out where the water level, their spring levels are, at various times of the year.
Okay, that leads me to my next question. Why is it important to understand more about groundwater levels? Why do you need to know this kind of information, John?
It goes back to the sort of overarching theme of the baseline studies, right? I mean, you need to know, how your groundwater behaves, and sort of the seasonality of it, and as well as just looking at the types of soil material. So we touched on that earlier, right? So it's, if you have sandy material versus clay material, that could change how you build your infrastructure, and how it interacts with the environment. So it's really just getting an understanding of how things behave now, so then you can design something, as best as possible. And then, once the infrastructure is built, or during the construction process, you can kind of monitor how things are changing, to sort of, identify if your solution is appropriate, or if it needs to be modified. So it's really just about getting as much information as possible so you can help the decision-making process.
So, John, groundwater levels then change from season to season, do they?
Absolutely. I mean, same with water courses, right? The water level in a creek changes, seasonally. So too does groundwater, potentially, right? It really depends on the area, but yeah, and that's one thing we're trying to. One of the objectives of this program is to figure out, what that change is, and how often it occurs, and whatnot.
So the groundwater, John, it kind of, there's a word that I see a lot, and the word is seepage. So it's almost like leaking, right? Leaking out of the ground to the surface. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean that's correct. It's basically, the seepage is kind of like the interaction between groundwater and surface water, for lack of a better term. It's
Okay.
sort of how those two kind of behave, right? I mean, you can have groundwater seeping into uh, surface water.
Oh, I think we've lost John there. We've lost our connection with John. Hopefully that'll come back shortly. Um, I was going to ask him.
You
The
know,
reason. Are you there, John? No, it looks like we've lost John.
you
Okay,
see
we've lost him.
it.
Okay. So we were talking about groundwater seepage, which is where the water comes from underground and then flows into lakes and fills up those lakes at different times for different reasons. The next question I was going to ask John is, what are the water wells that are installed as part of the project used for? So I can tell you a bit about that. Well, hopefully we'll get John back, but they're used basically to be able to measure what we were just talking about, the changes in water levels between seasons, to better understand what's going on below the surface as far as water goes. I think hopefully we can put a picture up of an installed water well, and then because we've installed a number of wells through the project study area, so hopefully we can bring that up on the screen so people can see what they look like. This is challenging work to install wells. John, are you? Do we have you back yet?
Yeah, can you hear me, Don?
Oh yeah, there you are. Okay, good. Sorry, John, I was just filling time with whatever knowledge I had. So here, I'll go back to the question that I attempted to answer myself. What are the water wells installed as part of the project used for? What information is collected from these water wells, John?
Yeah, so it's kind of twofold. So when they're initially installed, they're put in various methods. You push them in, or you actually have a drill rig out there. In that case, you can actually identify and see the types of soils as you're putting in the wells. You can kind of see what the layering of soils is, which is useful from a design standpoint. And then once they're installed, you can actually measure what the water is within that. So you can kind of measure what the groundwater level is, and you can kind of go back, at different times of the year and physically observe what the changes are in the water level.
Okay, that leads me to my next question, John. How do you measure groundwater levels? Is it a complicated thing?
I mean, for lack of a better term, it's really just essentially a tape measure, right? So it's basically a fancy tape measure that has a sensor at the end. So as you lower it into the well, when it comes in contact with water, it either beeps or lights up, and from there you can read off what your depth is.
Wow, that's a great mystery to me. I never knew that, John. I never knew that. It's learning something every day. Well, let's see if. Okay, what we're going to do now is wrap things up as far as the question session, John. Thanks again for joining us. This was really, really informative. You explained things really well to us, and I'm sure everyone will see you again in various forms on our website and other information sources. So thanks for joining us, John, and I'm sure we'll talk to you in a few weeks.
Okay. Have a good one, Don.
Thanks, John. Okay, so as a bit of a preview for next week's session is on fish and wildlife. And as a bit of a preview, what we want to do is play a couple of excerpts, I think, from a discussion we had last week with a community member of Webequie talking about fish and wildlife. Now, this was a first discussion, and what we want to do in these streaming sessions is include more content with community members talking about their homeland. This is really important to us, and so this is sort of a preview of what you're going to see next week and in following weeks as well. So let's go to that discussion, which was a Zoom call between a couple of the project team members and a community member. Let's go to that right now. Thanks.
All year round. But the majority of the people while hunting fall.
So, Samson, do different families have different areas where they like to hunt for moose or different areas where they like to hunt or fish?
And different families do have, certain areas that they usually utilize, and they would share that with other family groups as well.
Okay, another question here. Just to give people an idea of how big moose are, How much meat would you get from, let's say, a bull moose, just to give people an idea of that?
So if everybody gets, equal portions, we can, feed 50 to 60 people. But if it's just 4 or 5 people, families, they'll probably fill up their freezers depending on the size of their freezers.
Okay, we're back. Hope you enjoyed that. I mean, again, that's just a preview. There's lots more. There's lots more coming as far as that goes, and we're gonna talk about a lot of different subjects with different community members, old, young, male, and female, hopefully as well. So that should be pretty interesting. And in fact, now we're going to go to a couple more videos. One, I believe, on fish, I think, and then another one on moose. So let's go to those next. And pardon me.
We'll just do the fish.
Okay, we're just going to do fish, from what I understand. So again, another preview for next week's discussion, which is going to be a big one. It's a big topic, like water. We're just scratching the surface right now. So let's go to those videos. Are we ready to go to those videos? Let's go to those videos right now.
Community members fish from the shoreline or mainly from boats?
Both. Yeah. Go on shore and fish from there.
Which species do community members like to fish for? What are the ones that community members like?
Basically, walleye, sucker, whitefish, sturgeon, and pike are the main fish.
Where do your community members go fishing? Do they fish all over Webequie traditional lands?
They fish all over the area, and sometimes specific sites for different seasons.
So do community members do a lot of ice fishing?
That's one of the favorite things that the community members do. At least a dozen people every day.
Do community members fish from the shoreline or mainly from boats?
Both. Yeah, certain areas they would go on shore and fish from there.
Okay, thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed those little preview videos. Next week's a big week, big topic, lot to talk about. We're going to have an expert who knows a lot about a lot when it comes to fish and wildlife. There's going to be a lot more sessions on this, I think, in the future, especially highlighting community members' knowledge, and because community members love to talk about the fish and wildlife of their homeland. So we're going to talk about that next week, and then in following weeks as well too. So I just want to thank everyone for tuning in today. It's important to us that you tune in and follow us. And there's a lot of information available on our website, supplyroad.ca, and you can contact us through. You can get more information and keep in touch with us via Facebook and Instagram through Supply Road. This is our way of one of our ways of dealing with the COVID situation and being able to communicate information on the project to you. And if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to contact us. We'll get back to you. We're happy to talk to you. And if your community wants to meet with us, we would love to talk to you and tell you more about the project and answer any questions that you might have. So thanks again for tuning in. Make sure you join us again next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Same location to talk about fish and wildlife. Stay safe. Things are challenging right now, but stay safe, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Thanks for tuning in.